What I've discovered in my research is that you can describe any situation, whether it's describing achievements to your boss or really, frankly, any situation, participating in a meeting, giving feedback, anything, in terms of 6 dimensions. And that's what I call the cultural code. These dimensions are directness, how straightforwardly you're expected to communicate in that situation, directness, enthusiasm, formality, assertiveness, self-promotion, and then personal disclosure, like how much you're expected to reveal about yourselves. So what you can do is you can take any situation in the world, right? And you can understand what the cultural code is, like on a scale of 1 to 7, high to low, however you want to do it. What's the cultural code in your native culture? And then what's the cultural code for that very same situation in a different culture? Then where are the gaps and where are the overlaps?
Andy, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I feel like I'm in your little universe now in your office.
Yeah, you see the little globe in the back there.
Oh yeah, I didn't even notice that as well.
Yeah.
Be honest with me. Have you read all of those books on that bookshelf?
Yeah, actually.
You have?
It's I got rid of a lot of books. So I only kept the ones that I've read, and then I'm not gonna feel like I'm flexing a little bit here, but then there's ones that I wrote.
Okay, fair enough. It's a combination. Yeah, I just find because I felt like an imposter sometimes. I used to have a bookshelf in the back of my old podcast set, and I think 50% of them I hadn't even read because I'd get like a lot of people would send in their books for the show, and I'm like, I just don't have time to read.
No,
every single person's book. Yeah.
No, I hear you. It's funny. I'm not, even though I'm an author, I'm not a huge reader. I'm not a huge reader. My wife is a voracious reader. She reads like a book a week. She just plows.
Really? Wow.
Just loves to read. I'm more of like a podcast guy or a radio guy. I read occasionally, but not a huge reader.
Yeah, I don't read whatsoever actually. I'm pure audiobook.
Yeah.
And I have a couple of apps that like Blinkist that like summarize books into like 30-minute episodes, which is really cool. Yeah, so you can listen to like an audio book that will be like 10 hours. It breaks it down to 30 minutes. And I can consume them like 1 or 2 of those a day, and it kind of gives you the key takeaways and actionable items of how to go and implement that. And then I can just go and implement it straight away. So I'm even quite sad. It kind of sounds weird to say on a podcast. I even have it on a speaker stuck to the wall in the bathroom. So even when I'm having a shower or I'm like brushing my teeth, I'm like learning something. I'm like, I try any moment I can cram it in.
I'm the same way. I listen to podcasts while I cook, while I walk the dogs, all that stuff. Yeah. I'm the same way.
Yeah. Or even when I'm working out, like I'm like listening to a podcast and I'm trying to lift a really heavy weight, but it's like, it just works for me anyway. Whatever works for you, what you're listening right now, like whether it's a book, podcast, whatever works, right?
I agree.
Before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself personally and your current role, and obviously and the many books that you've written. You obviously have a very diverse career, which I'd love to share with the audience.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a professor of organizational behavior and international management at Brandeis University, which is a small research university outside of Boston in the U.S. I'm in the business school, but my background is in psychology and business. So I have a PhD from Harvard Business School and Harvard Psychology Department. So that's kind of like my background. In addition, I write academic stuff, but about, I really like, I didn't get into this only to speak to other academics. I got into this to almost try to use academia as like an R&D factory of ideas so that I could then do stuff that could hopefully make a difference in the world. And that's where the books come from. I've written probably 50 or 60 Harvard Business Review articles. I've got a LinkedIn newsletter. I've got a regular newsletter. I just do a lot of stuff because I think it's really important to not just sort of sit in the ivory tower.
Yeah, I think that's one of the exciting things about when I saw your work is about turning ideas into action.
Yeah.
Right. And then you being able to help companies then deploy that, which is then having the meaningful impact that you want, right? Because it's great to do the research, it's great to have the R&D, but how does that then follow through to changing people's lives, the way they work and society as a whole?
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I mean, that's that's like my why. That's like
Mm.
why I do this. Because otherwise, it just wouldn't be as meaningful. I mean, I would say teaching also is part of my why. I love teaching. I love connecting with younger people. But no, doing stuff that's that's actionable. And then, I create trainings, I do coaching, like seeing it firsthand. And then when you get notes or emails or whatever about, I really liked your book, we used your book, whatever it is, that's really gratifying too.
Yeah. Where I want to start is there's something that I've been thinking a lot about recently is, and I think this is your 2017 book. You talk about the comfort zone. Is that right? Could
Yeah.
you elaborate a little bit more on the why behind the book, and then we'll jump into some of the
Sure.
topics?
Yeah. So that book's called Reach.
Yeah.
And so my first book was Global Dexterity, which was in 2013. That was about stepping outside your cultural comfort zone.
Ah, okay.
I got a lot of I got a lot of emails and LinkedIn messages and stuff, following that first book saying that, we think this is really cool, but what about stepping outside your comfort zone in general, not just across cultures? Just can you say something broader? Because people are often having to step outside their comfort zone to grow and learn. And if you're an entrepreneur, if you're taking on a different role in your company throughout your career, you're trying something new, you're sort of stretching and so on. You're becoming a parent for the first time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're constantly stepping outside our comfort zones. And so how can we understand that, from an intellectual standpoint, but in a way that's like super practical and easy to
Yeah.
understand?
And you know what we
And
should
so
do
that,
then? Let's do
yeah,
a Star Wars here and go in chronological order. so
yeah, 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 yeah.
so let's start with talking about global dexterity, and I think that's a
Yeah.
great segue into Reach. So
Yeah.
firstly, what is global dexterity? Just break that down for people.
Yeah, so most of the stuff on crossing cultures out there, global business, huge topic.
Hmm.
Most of the stuff out there is about differences, right? About how people from the UK might be different from Germans, or how people are French are different from, I don't know, people from China or whatever it is. And they talk about differences, like all the books, all the training, everything. But what I noticed from my research, on the ground, and I can tell you about that if you want,
Yeah.
but real world stuff, I noticed that the real problem people were having wasn't some sort of understanding of the differences. It's useful, but the real problem that a lot of them were having was how to step outside their cultural comfort zone. So they know about the differences, but how can you switch and adapt your behavior in light of those differences? And so that's what the book was about, and that's the idea of dexterity. So it's not just understanding the differences, but adapting your behavior in a different culture. And so what that book talks about is it talks about sort of the internal world of people as they try to do this, because it's not always easy, actually.
Mm.
What can stop them, and then how they can do it more successfully. And that book has made a really good impact, which I'm like super proud of. It's used a lot in a lot of different contexts. It's helped a lot of people. And so that's what the book's about.
Yeah. Can you share some practical ways that things that you share in the book to people to actually execute that in your
Sure.
organization or personally? What does that look like?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So one of the biggest parts of that book is what I call the cultural code. And this has become a very useful tool for people. And the idea is that you can take any situation that you're in. Let's just choose a professional situation. Let's say you're describing achievements to your boss. Like oftentimes that's something you need to do in an organization, to be able to describe achievements to your boss at your performance review, because your boss might not know what you're doing. And you need to, that's just something that you need to do oftentimes, just as an
Yeah.
example. So what I've discovered in my research is that you can describe any situation, whether it's describing achievements to your boss or really, frankly, any situation, participating in a meeting, giving feedback, anything, in terms of 6 dimensions. And that's what I call the cultural code. These dimensions are directness, how straightforwardly you're expected to communicate in that situation, directness, enthusiasm, formality, assertiveness, self-promotion, and then personal disclosure, like how much you're expected to reveal about yourself. So you got directness, enthusiasm, formality, assertiveness, self-promotion, and personal disclosure. So what you can do is you can take any situation in the world, right? And you can understand what the cultural code is, like on a scale of 1 to 7, high to low, however you want to do it. What's the cultural code in your native culture? And then for that situation, and then what's the cultural code for that very same situation in a different culture?
Mm,
Then where are the gaps and where the overlap. So an overlap would mean where the code in your culture is pretty similar to the code for that particular dimension in another culture. But where are the gaps? That's the key question. So for example, take so I teach in a business school. We've got tons of international MBA students. Take a student from India. I'm teaching in about an hour, and I can tell you I'm going to see a bunch of Indian MBA students. So imagine describing achievements to your boss. Now, in the US, your level of enthusiasm needs to be fairly high. It's appropriate in the US to show excitement for what you've done. It's not off the charts high, but it's high. It's
yes.
relatively high. Assertiveness, you want to be seen as in the US as a go-getter. You don't want to appear weak or timid. Again, this is cultural, and
Yes.
that's sort of, expected. And then self-promotion. In the US, a lot of people think a US might be a 8 on a 1 to 7 scale. It's not, but it's also not a 1. It's definitely more of like a 4 or 5 or 6, whatever. But in India, these very same things, enthusiasm, assertiveness, or self-promotion, are probably fairly low in the Indian cultural code. And if someone is sort of like prototypically Indian in terms of their upbringing, it might be very difficult. There would be a gap on each of these dimensions of the cultural code that they might have to somehow deal with and overcome. Now, I do want to say that not every person from India is the same. Not every person from the US is the same. Not every situation is the same. You could have someone from India who had a bicultural upbringing, maybe had one parent from the UK, one
Yeah,
parent
sure.
from India. So what you end up having to do is look at the cultural code of the situation you're going to, and then compare it to your own personal cultural code. Your own personal code might be influenced by where you're from, but not just where you're from your personality, your life experience, and so on. My grander point here, I know this is hard without a blackboard and all that. My grander point here is that what the book does is, a lot of people think culture is this squishy idea, and the book, gives you a very simple but I think sophisticated scientific method for being able
I
to
love that.
make sense. That's the idea. And
I,
people really have grasp that.
I've literally probably had hundreds of conversations on the podcast with CHROs who have, a CHRO that was in North America that's now been sent over to, Asia, and have told me disastrous stories
Mm,
about how they've led and led meetings and one-to-one meetings and sessions with the same approach they would in the US, and it's been a disaster
yeah.
for that. And so I love the fact that you've given a practical framework for them to kind of assess against. And I suppose
Yeah.
it works on both sides, like right, both as
Yeah.
an employee and as a manager and as a leader. You can use the same
Absolutely.
same
Yep.
playbook, right, on both sides of the fence.
Yep.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that. And those are the things that people love. So I'm excited to for people to grab the book, and a practical way for them to do that. Because typically most people that I speak to, they only learn that through experience of spending 10 years working across all of those cultures and learning it the hard way.
Right. And they
Right?
and they also they also might only have their own experience as opposed to learning from a variety of different
Yes,
experiences. Yeah.
exactly. No, I love that. So then that's
Yeah.
so from there that kind of led into the reach,
Yeah, yeah. So
right?
Reach was so exactly. So for Reach, what I did is I interviewed like over 100 people from a variety of different professions, like tons of different professions. I'm talking doctors, lawyers, police officers, priests, actors, managers, executives, like you name it, entrepreneurs, trying to understand. I also did academic research on this topic as well, but to understand what basically that book was about. Why is it hard to step outside your comfort zone? Like, why? Obviously it's hard, it creates anxiety, but why? And I can share that with
I
you,
love it.
what some of those findings are. Why is it hard to step outside your comfort zone? How do we avoid doing it? What are our sort of top techniques for avoiding? And then most importantly, what people can do to be more successful. And that's what distinguished the people who were successful from the people who weren't. Or for the same person, what made me successful in this situation, but didn't make me as successful in that situation. And
Mm.
so that's what that book was about. Again, my goal with all this stuff is to try to like take something that's complex and make it simple, not simplistic, like it captures the complexity a bit, but it's simple, it's usable, like a recipe,
Yeah, I love
for
that.
that's the idea.
So let's start from the beginning. Why is it so hard for people to step outside their comfort zone?
Yeah, so what I found was that I found that there were five across everyone. There were five what I called psychological roadblocks or challenges to step outside your comfort zone. Now, not everyone experiences every one of these in every situation, but even one of them or two of them can make it, it can cause people to like there are two doors. Door number one is okay. I'm going to give this thing a shot. Door number two is I think I'm going to avoid it. It's not that, and then all the rationalizations. It's not that important. I'll do it another time. It's like door number one and door number two. And the more of these psychological roadblocks people have that they don't deal with, the more they're going to go to door number two. They're going to avoid it, right? And so what these psychological roadblocks are the first one's authenticity. This doesn't feel natural to me. An entrepreneur, a young entrepreneur, having to put their grown-up voice on when pitching to venture capitalists. They're 20 years old. They're trying to get funding for their company. They feel completely out of their comfort zone doing this. They feel like a poser, like an imposter. I actually interviewed for the book several people who were on Shark Tank, the big show in the
Hmm.
US. I don't know if you have it in the UK or
Yeah, yeah,
not.
yeah. Watch that. Yeah.
Yeah, Shark Tank. Yeah. So a variety of different people. So authenticity. This doesn't feel like me. This doesn't feel natural, and that creates anxiety. A second core challenge is what I called likability. It's sort of the idea that if I act in this way outside my comfort zone, people won't like. What if people don't like this version of me? So, for
Mm.
example, there's a story in the book about someone who needed to act more assertively than she was used to. And she's not a very assertive person, but it's a long story, but there was a guy who was really making her life miserable and she needed to stand up to him in her company. And it was so hard for her to do. It was very much outside her comfort zone. And one of her worries is that this person would, ironically, because he was really the hateable one, but this person would hate her or not like her if she was more assertive than she's used to being, because it's just so much outside her comfort zone. So with authenticity, you feel unnatural. With likability, you worry other people won't like this version of you.
It's
So those are
crazy.
two of them.
Yeah.
Another one is competence. That's one a lot of people probably immediately thought of. What if I'm going to look like a fool doing this? Like, what if I'm bad at this? What if people see I'm bad at this? That's like, you're a lot of people avoid public speaking, afraid they'll look like a fool giving a public speech. That would be an example of competence. The fourth one, there are five. The fourth one is resentment. So this is the idea that logically, you need to do something at work or in your career to accomplish some goal, but psychologically, you might feel resentful. It's like you're frustrated or angry or annoyed that you have to do this. And a good example of this might be I talked with a lot of people who were sort of shy or introverted, but incredibly high performers in companies, and they were extremely frustrated that they seemed to be getting overlooked in their companies to get cool opportunities compared to people who were less skilled than them, but who were really good at making small talk about, like,
Mm.
last weekend's Premier League game or something like that. And that those are the people who are able to get, because they could build the trust and create the rapport and so on, which I think it's a useful professional skill, of course, but, relative to the actual work they were doing, the shyer person's actual skills and abilities were much more important. And when they realized that what they needed to do to be able to get ahead was to start doing this small talk stuff, they were like deeply frustrated and annoyed and resentful about that. So that's a fourth roadblock in terms of stepping outside your comfort zone. And then the last one is morality, actually. Like, I feel like I'm doing something wrong here. I actually opened the book Reach, with a true story of a young entrepreneur who started a company with a few people, one of whom was her best friend. And it turned out that she ultimately needed to fire her best friend from the job, because the best friend was not holding her weight. She was holding the company back. And it was a real dilemma for the entrepreneur for multiple reasons. You've got the likability challenge there, you've got the authenticity challenge, you got the
Yeah.
competence challenge, and then you got the morality challenge. She felt she was doing something wrong. I mean, she understood the context, she understood why it had to be done, but she honestly felt she was doing something wrong. So all these psychological roadblocks can weigh on you, either in the moment, or they can weigh on you anticipatorily. Like you can avoid doing it. That's where you go to door number two, and you're like, I'm not doing this. Like,
Yeah.
I'll get someone else to do it, or I'll do it another way, or And so these are the challenges that people have. And so what I find in the training and the work that I do is that, like, usually it's a cocktail. It's like a couple of them, and
Yeah.
it's in. But what I also find is that it's actually empowering to be able to have people read the book or understand these concepts, because it gives people language to discuss why they're struggling. Usually without this language, without this insight, people might just be like, oh, I'm stressed, some sort of
Yeah, how
vague
do you
thing.
have you have to give them the language to have the conversation. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
That's so
Yeah, because
empowering.
otherwise, yeah, exactly. So that's that. There's other stuff in the book, of
I
course.
love that already. It's the same. That's the same thing. One of the first things I thought when you was describing the culture code. You gave them the
Yeah,
language to
yeah,
have the conversation, and this is what I
yeah.
mean by. Otherwise, it's just vague. Otherwise, to do. And I love your examples, by the way. I kind of saw myself in so many of those, and I'm sure everyone listening could all relate. I too had to fire a founder
Mm,
in the past, and it was a friend, and it was one of the toughest things I've
mm,
ever had to do. I also, early in my career, when I was a manager, had that frustration of seeing my peers being promoted around me because I didn't drink, smoke, or go out and do the parties with the other founders and the other leadership team. And even though I was outperforming my counterparts, they were being promoted because they were at those parties, they were in those discussions and conversations. And I remember I just had a flashback when you're saying how frustrated that I was, being like, what the hell is going on right now? Why are these people being promoted when I'm literally bringing in the sales environment, bringing in double the revenue that they are, and I'm building a better, high performing teams. And I was like, okay, because I'm not at the pub on a Friday after work. That's why.
yeah.
Yeah, as well. And yeah, all of those examples you shared, I love the way. So when you look at people that let's flip it on the other side. When you look at people that on opposite end of the spectrum that kind of seek discomfort, have a very high comfort threshold, what is the key to that? Is it repetition, for example, that they keep going through it and they build a level of resilience Shane and I, we always talk about seeking discomfort. Like
Mm,
one of our main focuses is the magic and the pot of gold is when we're seeking discomfort. And Chester, my coach, Chester Elton, he'd always tell me, Chris, you just got to put more and more reps. And the more reps you do, I saw Elon Musk's wife, they interviewed her recently, and she said, why is Elon so successful? And she said, he lives in a level of discomfort that will break most people. And
mm.
he's just comfortable in the chaos. And his level of resilience, he's just, most people will just break, and that's where he thrives. That's where he lives because he constantly puts himself in that
That's
position. And I thought that was really,
that's
really
yeah.
insightful.
Yeah, that is interesting, like a forcing mechanism. I mean, I think so there's a lot there that you just said, in my view. So one thing is that certain people are more predisposed to that, right? Certain people are, have sort of personalities that are conducive to being resilient in terms of withstanding some of the stuff that we're talking about, right? And that could be just that could be your personality that you were born with, your genetics. Could also be how you were raised in a way. So it could be usually these things are nature and nurture in psychology. But in the other a couple other things I'll say. Another thing I'll say is that usually think about it as like a portfolio, just like you might have a portfolio of stocks and bonds and things. You've got a portfolio of situations in your life. Some of them you might be willing to give it a shot and go outside your comfort zone. um think about it, but others not. Think about it in terms of, like, you've got a comfort zone, you've got a stretch zone, and you've got a terror zone, right? And so, like, you might be willing to do stuff in your stretch zone, maybe even at the outskirts of your stretch zone, but that terror zone, that's a tougher one. You kind of need to have deep sense of conviction that whatever you're doing in this terror zone is worth it, right? Like, and in fact, what I find is that to help people learn to step outside their comfort zone, there are two core things that they need to learn. Um, the first is mindset, that you might, when you talked about the work with your coach or your business partner. Um, you need to have conviction that it's worth it, that it's your why. And that can come from a lot of different places. It can come from a professional place, like, you need to grow and develop, and maybe you have certain goals that you want to reach, or you could, whatever it could be. It could also be personal. Like for me, I have to tell you that one of my sources of conviction, I have two kids now young adults, but when they were younger, my wife and I were always trying to nudge our kids outside their comfort zones, not in some crazy way, but like my son, for instance, for him, he's a bit shy, on the shy side. For him, out of his comfort zone would be trying an activity where he doesn't know anyone. That for a kid like that, that's outside his comfort zone. We're not like doing something cruel, like, like
No, it's
we're
important. Yeah.
choosing something that he might want to do, right? And so, you know, but then so we're doing that, but then I start to reflect about my own life, and I'm seeing myself like avoid things outside my comfort zone. I sort of feel like I'm not practicing what I preach. And so that sort of role of wanting to be a role model for my kid, that ends up being a real source of conviction for me, actually,
I
in
love it.
terms of stepping outside my comfort zone. So it can come from anywhere. That's the mindset side. I'll just briefly mention that the other side is what I call customization. And so it's conviction and customization. Customization is the idea that there's often, I would say almost always, no single way to do anything, right? We customize all sorts of stuff. My coffee right here, customized, the one I'm holding in my hand. It's got almond milk and a little bit of ginger in it. That's my customization. The point is that you can usually find a way in any situation to tweak it,
Yeah.
to make it just a little bit more comfortable. I'll give you one quick example that I was working on with someone the other day. They're really afraid of public speaking, really afraid. So much so that they try at all costs to avoid it. The problem is that they want to become the the head of their company thinks that they have the potential to be a real leader. And to be able to achieve that, though, they have to make a name for themselves, become sort of a known figure. And so I'm trying to help this person with public speaking. And so what I mean by customization is there are a lot of little tweaks and tricks that you can do to make a situation your own. So as it turns out, this person is a morning person, and she absolutely is terrified of giving a speech at the end of the day because she'll just stress about it all day. So it's
Yeah.
way better for
Just
her
get out of the
to
way.
tweak
Mm.
the timing. That's an example. Another example for her is that if she can either meet someone before the talk or have someone she knows in the talk, be sort of in the center, kind of in the front, and give her sort of like positive feedback so that she can end up speaking to that person, not entirely, but to always know that she can come back to that
If they
face.
need to. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's another customization. Another customization would be that she likes to wear a bracelet. She calls it her fierce bracelet. It means, for some reason, it's the bracelet she always wears
I
when
love
she's
it.
afraid of doing something. And so she'll pop that bracelet on. I mean, there are a variety of different things you can do here. Some people, by the way, for speeches or public speaking, they might be more comfortable delivering an actual speech. Someone else might be more comfortable with Q&A. Like for me, for instance, I actually really like the Q&A. I like the give and take. I'm not afraid of public speaking, but I used to be when I was younger, but not anymore. I've done this so much, but you can sometimes tweak the format. My point here is that the way that you learn to step outside your comfort zone is that you develop the conviction to figure out your why. You find a way to make that situation your own a little bit, and then you do what you just said. You try it. You keep doing it.
Reps.
It's
Yeah.
reps. But it's
Mm.
in the reason that that's so important is because the reason reps are important is because if you avoid something, you're never going to learn. You're never going to learn about yourself. never going to learn about, hey, this isn't as hard as I thought it was, or hey, I'm actually a little bit better at this than I thought I was. You're not going to learn anything if you don't do the reps, right? And so it's not just the reps though. It's the reps and then some degree of reflection about what it was like. And that's why a coach is useful too. So
Yeah.
that's what that whole body of thinking around that book Reach is about.
Yeah. I love that. You kind of create like those little rituals in, now she knows when she's speaking, these are the check boxes.
Yeah.
Gives me kind of a solid foundation to operate from.
Yeah.
It also is in a way not a distraction, but I mean something to ground you beyond focusing on the specific task.
Yeah, and you're not helpless.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
think a lot of times people feel they're helpless, but you're not. You've got more. It's like you got a little bit more power and control. Now you don't have total control, you don't have total power, but you've got a little bit more than you think you have.
and like this is something people always surprise about me because I've done 1,000 of these shows. I've moderated and hosted our Citro in-person roundtables all over the world, but I'm terrified of public speaking still.
Mm.
Right?
A lot of
And not
people are.
terrified now. I would say like I just I've never done it and not felt uncomfortable. But after the first 5 minutes, I just forget about it. So it's just sort of that like build up beforehand, like you was describing. And then when I finally go, then I'm like the rest of the 2 days that I'm moderating, I'm fine. Right? It's just like that initial hello and the initial like first few minutes almost. And if I can get past those first few minutes, which obviously I always do, then the rest of the day I'm good. It's just like that's like the little hurdle for me. And then when I get and people are like, dude, you do this, you've done this for 20 years, Chris. Why? And I'm like, I don't know. Because I just put pressure on myself because I want it to be a good experience for people. So it's not.
Yeah.
It's less about do I think I'm good, capable because I know I am, and more about am I creating the experience that because these people have taken 2 days out of their busy lives and schedules to be here. Am I delivering expectations to make this a great experience? That's the pressure I'm putting on myself. Less about am I capable, am I prepared, and more like am I delivering for the
And
audience? Yeah.
I totally understand that. And some people think anxiety is bad, but
No.
there's a you want to have the psychologists talk about like sort of like a U curve, like a parabola of anxiety, like too little anxiety. You don't want too little anxiety because anxiety has a motivating factor to it, right?
Yes.
You don't want too little. You also don't want too much because then you're sort of paralyzed. You
That's
want
me
some,
sometimes. Yeah.
yeah, well, it could be, but then you can use some of the stuff we talked about before to try to bring it back into the middle range, and that's where you want to be, I think.
Yeah, I've gone too far at moments, and that's because led to me, and I've talked about this publicly and on LinkedIn around, I've gone too far and I've had anxiety attacks, panic
Yeah.
attacks. I had a panic attack actually before an event, before I was about to go on stage one time. This is like 8 years ago at General Mills at their HQ. I'm about to go out, present, and I had a full blown panic attack. I had to go out on the balcony. My co-founder's like, I'm like, I don't know what's happening right now, right?
Oh my
So
God, that's terrifying.
yeah, yeah, and I had panic attacks growing up, and it's something I hid for 15 years. Like no one knew about it. Literally, I hid it from friends, family, wife. No one knew. So because I was kind of, that's a whole other episode and story. But it's only something recently I started talking about, and I haven't had one since, which is kind of interesting when you think about the psychology behind that, right? As well, but one of the things that really helped me, which I was ashamed of, which I think I'd love to hear your insight on this, is growing up. I had a tough upbringing, so it was a lot of domestic violence in the house. I don't remember it because I was kind of young, but I kind of like my body remembers the trauma, if that makes sense. I don't visually remember it. It was just my mum was raising 4 kids. She did an incredible job on her own, which was tough, but she's amazing at what she did. So it was rough. Growing up, I was bullied really badly. So it was really really hard, and I was ashamed of that for a long time. And also I didn't do well in school. I obviously started that job actually in sales at 17. Didn't even go to school, and for a long time I was ashamed of all those things. And it was only kind of years down the line when I was very successful in my job that I realized that level of resilience that I built through going through those experiences made me exceptional at my job.
Absolutely.
because when everyone was complaining about how hard the day was, or that the customer said no, I was like, dude, I'm gonna go home and don't know if we have electricity. I'm gonna go home and not know if we're gonna have food. I'm gonna go home and I don't know what's gonna to happen when I get home, right? Like, and you're complaining about trivial stuff, right? In my mind, and it was only then that I was like, wow, like this is sort of my differentiate here, that my level of resilience of picking up the phone and calling and talking about reps, hundreds and hundreds of no's before I get my yes. I was like, that's fine. That's normal, right? And everyone else was like taking it personal, like it was a personal no to their ego, to their personality, to their self-worth. So that was kind of one lesson that I learned. And the other, and I'm very thankful for this, that Shane, who's my co-founder, his dad, Shane's my next door neighbor, my co-founder, his dad kind of helped me, and because obviously we didn't have much money, he took me along to play ice hockey at a very high level, basketball, and all of the sports that Shane and I did. And by doing that, you fail a lot. You lose games. Shane and I would go home crying in the back seat because we lost our ice hockey game. Well, like, and we also were coachable. So there was reps. We knew that the more reps we did, the better we'd get. So by the time I went into the business world, we both had this really weird combination of coming from a tough upbringing combined with being in sports where you lose, you learn to get, we do the reps, you fall over on the ice a lot. And if you bring those two together, it creates quite a powerful combination of resilience. And then also I was like, the first thing I said to my boss when I got that job is, who's the person making the most money? I want to sit next to them. Because I took the same principle from ice hockey and the other things. I was like, whoever's the best player, I need to learn from that person. And I didn't know any of this at the time. I just unconsciously gravitated towards that. But now I realize that that's kind of, and that's why we talk about seeking discomfort. Because like wherever we do, we kind of just run towards it. And it's scary. It feels terrible. You feel terrified, but you understand that that's the price you pay. I know it's a long story, but I mean, that was something that I think really helped us to continue to grow and innovate.
Yeah. I mean, it's talk about a source of conviction. You've got this strength, that enables you to see challenges in a very different way than other people do. So
Yeah.
that's a superpower.
Yeah, I say that. Oh my God, Chester, my coach, he said to me one time, resilience is your superpower.
There you go.
He said, and I was like, what? And he was like, Chris, after like months of working together, he's like, I want to let you know that resilience is your superpower, and you need to make sure that you always remember that.
Yeah.
So it's crazy that you just said that as well. In terms of you've already took. There's so much. We need to do a whole series on your work at this point. The most recent book, Global Forging Bonds in a Global Workforce. Just talk about that before we wrap up, because I want to make sure, because there's some great work that you're doing there.
Yeah, sure. That book is sort of like the second step from global dexterity. So global dexterity is about stepping outside your cultural comfort zone as an individual person. Like, how can I be successful as an individual person? Forging bonds is about how to build relationships across cultures. So I've seen in my work the critical importance of building relationships across cultures in a business context. But I never found anything that was written about it that was good. And like, people need to do that, on a team, individually. And so that's what that book's about. I can share one little snippet from the book, which is sort of, along the lines of my other book, something that people can take away. And what that would be for this book is that we found that there were the process of relationship building can differ across cultures, and that's critical to understand when you are trying to build a relationship with someone from another culture. Of course, people might not be characteristic of your impression of that culture, but they might be. So here's some examples. Like, so cultures differ in relationship building in terms of power, who can have a relationship with whom. Purpose, what's the goal of the relationship? Is it purely personal? Is it instrumental? Is it both? And cultures differ on that too. Privacy, how quickly people tend to share information with each other. In some cultures, people readily share very, very quickly. Like, I'll say Brazil, for instance, versus somewhere like Germany, where it can take a while to crack that sort of personal barrier. So that's privacy. Presence. When you first initially meet someone and trying to establish rapport, how formally do people tend to act? How much positive emotion do they show? Cultures differ on that.
Yeah.
Place is another one. Where does relationship building typically take place in a given culture? And so these, of course, these start with P, where we
I
try to
love
make
it.
it
Yeah.
power, purpose, privacy, presence, place. And the point here is that these are sort of ways to understand and unlock some of the cultural differences in the relationship building process itself. So that's, I mean, the books, of course, has way more in it, but that's just one
Yeah.
little
No,
nugget to share.
I love it. Again, we're all discovering this on the podcast. You have a very great way of distilling information into. Is that five P's or did I miss
There were
six?
six, and I'm misremembering.
No, no,
I
that's fine.
forget the last one.
No, it's fine. I mean, what a
Yeah,
great framework that when you're entering that conversation to be like,
yeah,
let me address these six, and then
yeah,
depending on the nuance to be able to have that framework again to have the conversations to build it to
yeah.
understand it. I there was a CTO on a show recently who moved to Asia to be the CTO of a large company there, and he made a huge blunder when he was trying to build a relationship with one of the executives, and he bought them flowers, right? But the flowers he bought were the flowers that they buy when someone's died,
Mm.
and didn't know. So, and he presented it in front of the whole company. Imagine.
Oh.
And he didn't know for months why this person wasn't talking to them, why he was getting the cold shoulder. And it was only when someone actually said, "Hey, you don't do that," right? Like, I mean, that's an extreme it's a
Yeah.
situation, but very, you know,
Oh, it happens.
like
Yeah. Full pause.
faux pas that happen. So, like, I mean, that's an extreme version, but it's really important. To your point, in our company, um, I've had employees in the past. There was actually an Indian employee come in, and we had a morning meeting. And the reason I say Indian, you'll understand in a second. He said to me, "I can't believe that so and so in the meeting disagreed with you
Mm.
and said that you're wrong and that there's a better way of doing it. You're the CEO. How dare they do that, right?" Because he was like, "That would never happen in India, right?" And I had to take a step back for a second because I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, and then I was like, okay, culturally, that just wouldn't happen in most companies. Again, you can't blanket statement across all of this. And he was like, "But you're the CEO. Like, how can they say that you're wrong?" And I'm like, "Okay." I was like, "Let me sit down. It's not about me being my job title. It's about I hire these people for their perspective, their insight, the diversity of thought, and it's about not even the best ideas win because sometimes I'll disagree and it may not be the best idea, but I will still let that person carry through because I want them to learn from it, right? So go through it, learn from it, and some of our best ideas and innovations have come from things that we thought were crazy that weren't going to work. But I realized I had to have more and more conversations to actually encourage him to give me feedback, to challenge if he feels that something's could be done better, speak up, and that was hard for him to
Absolutely.
do
I
that.
have an example of that in one of my books where a American CEO, but similar to, British and the same sort of philosophy, believes in the importance of participation, not just sort of in terms of a moral idea, but in terms of the idea that often the very best ideas come from people that are closest to the work, right? So what he ended up doing in India was to make it a requirement for the person to pitch three ideas. So like he blended the idea of bottom up and top down. The bottom up was the ideas. The top down was it's a requirement, right? Like
Interesting.
so, yeah, it was kind of cool.
Yeah, but then that could work. But then you get like an introvert of like, how would they want to present that idea? So
True.
you'd have to give the freedom of, hey, you can send me an email because I know you don't want to
Right.
because I know you don't want to present that across in front of the entire company.
Right. Well,
So you got to be careful about that part.
that gets to customization, what we talked about
Yeah,
before.
there you go. Yeah, how do you customize that?
Yeah.
What would you say, like, when you think about building relationships across cultures, what do you think is like the biggest myth or misconception?
Oh gosh, there's so many myths and misconceptions. I I would say that maybe one of the biggest ones is that like people often feel that they need to do their homework and discover and master the do's and don'ts of another culture by, whenever they go to try to meet people in another culture. But the thing is that you're not working with another culture. You're working with another person, right? It's
Mm.
not a culture, it's a person. So that person might or might not be characteristic of what you predict or expect. And the key is not to focus on differences. I think you want to be aware of them, but the key is actually to discover similarities, not differences. And so I think that's one of the biggest errors as well. And whenever you think about culture, one of the first words that trip off your tongue is differences, cultural differences, right? But that's not how you build relationships, like in your own
Yeah, let's
culture.
just talk about all the things that are different. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You build relationships by discovering similarities. And so I think that's another related myth. And so, yeah, I think there's great opportunity, and I think that the benefit of this book is to sort of open people's eyes to some of the myths, and then give them some tools to try to overcome these, myths or challenges.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the mistakes we always make, like you just highlighted briefly there, is don't assume anything.
Yeah.
We get in trouble so many times. So, and it's we're well intended. We have good intentions sometimes, but our
Yeah.
assumptions sometimes get
Well,
us in
that's
trouble.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. That's why I always, but at the same time, cultural differences are useful to know about. So what I always say is that, come with sort of like a hypothesis or an idea of what you might see, but be ready to have that disconfirmed. Like be ready, like, you know what I mean? So you're
Yeah.
getting the best of both worlds there.
Yeah. Listen, I could talk to you forever. I love what you're doing, and I love how you distill everything into very practical things for everyone listening, to go away and do that. So we'll before I let you go, where can people learn more about you if they want to grab copies of the books, connect with you? Where's the best place?
Sure. I would say my either my website or LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find in both places. My website is Andy Molinsky, so it's AndyMolinsky.com.
Mhm.
And you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Amazing. Listen, I appreciate you coming on the show. We've learned a lot, and I feel like a lot of the topics that you are covering, HR leaders now more than ever, is on the priority
Mm.
for them as well. So I appreciate all of your work, and for everyone listening, all of those links are going to be below. So wherever you're watching, listening, whatever player you're in the description, there'll be a link to the website, a link to connect there on LinkedIn as well. But apart from that, enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your class that you're off to right now,
Yeah,
and
I'm gonna go prep for my class.
and I look forward to speaking again soon. Thanks so much.
All right, sounds great. Thanks a lot.